Herzlich willkommen, liebe Zuschauer, zu einer weiteren Folge von Im Auge des Bruders mit Scott Ritter, hier auf unserem YouTube-Kanal Gegenpol. Mein Name ist Monique Stegemann und in dieser Woche geht es um folgende Themen. Was passiert gerade am Dnepr? Bedroht die Eigenunorganisiertheit die russischen Pläne im Ukraine-Krieg? EU-Beitritt der Ukraine um jeden Preis? Droht der Europäischen Union eine Spaltung? Und zurück zur Vergangenheit in Großbritannien. Die Rückkehr von David Cameron und Tony Blair auf die politische Bühne. Hallo Scott, schön, dass du dir wieder die Zeit genommen hast. Wie geht es dir?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Das freut mich. Scott, gewohnheitsgemäß blicken wir direkt auf die erste Frage und wir schauen auf den Ukraine-Krieg. Russische Militärblogger äußern sich besorgt über die Lage am Dnepr in der Ortschaft Krieg unweit der Stadt Cherson. Laut den Bloggern agieren die russischen Truppen dort sehr unorganisiert, sodass es der ukrainischen Armee gelungen ist, erhebliche Geländegewinne zu erzielen. Wie schätzt du die Lage am Dnepr ein? Wie könnte diese sich auf die russischen Offensivpläne auswirken und kann es der Ukraine gelingen, die russischen Pläne zu durchkreuzen?
What Ukraine has done is taken advantage of a difficult geographic reality in the region. There are rivers, there are islands, there are isolated villages, and they have managed to put a couple battalions worth of Marine infantry across. These battalions are being decimated. Some Ukrainian prisoners that are taken say that they suffer 30% losses just getting there. Sustainability is impossible. They aren't positioned to carry out a meaningful offensive operation that can achieve anything of note. It's a distraction at the best, and the Russians are dealing with it. It's part and parcel of Ukraine's past history of throwing troops away at futile efforts. What can be achieved by this? It's they don't have a bridge, so you can't really have a bridge head. They're trying to establish a beachhead, but they're on constantly on fire. They don't control the waterway. This is a non-story. Look, Russian military bloggers have a history of playing Chicken Little. The sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. The sky's not falling. Russia has strategically won this war. The Ukrainian military is depleted, and there's no chance of Ukraine launching a meaningful, successful counterattack.
Aber wie konnten die ukrainischen Truppen die Gebietsgewinne erzielen? Siehst du ein Organisationsproblem bei der russischen Armee?
When you have a front that's as long as the Ukrainian-Russian front is, it's possible for Ukraine to have tactical successes, maybe even minor operational successes. I would remind people to go back and study the Second World War, in particular German military operations in the spring of 1945. Germany was defeated, no chance of victory. And yet, on any given day, Germany achieved tactical successes, even limited operational successes. Does that mean that the Russian forces were disorganized, the Soviet forces, or that the American forces were disorganized? No, it meant that the Germans still retained a level of professional capability and were, in limited occasions, able to achieve a small victory. But it didn't change the outcome of the war. Were the Russians disorganized in the Dnieper region in Kherson? I don't know. What I do know is that the Russians are engaged in successful offensive operations throughout the line of contact, that Russia has successfully defended critical points on that line of contact, and that Russia has succeeded in its strategic goal of diminishing Ukrainian military capacity. I'm not going to try and breathe meaning or relevance into what is a futile effort by Ukraine to generate headlines. The sky is not falling. Russia isn't losing. The Russian military hasn't suddenly forgotten how to fight.
Jüngst äußerte der EU-Außenbeauftragte Josep Borrell dass kein ukrainischer Sieg gegen Russland in Sicht sei. Dennoch ist die EU-Führung gewillt, die Unterstützung für Kiew uneingeschränkt fortzusetzen. Sie plant sogar einen beschleunigten Beitritt der Ukraine in die Europäische Union. Aber längst ziehen nicht mehr alle Mitgliedstaaten mit, so haben Ungarn und die Slowakei ein von der EU-Führung geplantes Finanzpaket für die Ukraine in Höhe von 50 Milliarden Euro blockiert. Um zukünftige Vetos aus Budapest oder Bratislava zu verhindern, diskutiert die EU, angeregt von Deutschland, das bisher vorherrschende Konsensprinzip zu kippen und zukünftig auf Mehrheitsentscheidungen zu setzen. Im Fall der Ukraine hat jüngst Litauen sogar eine Art Koalition der Willigen innerhalb der EU ins Gespräch gebracht. Was sagst du zu den Entwicklungen innerhalb der EU? Warum hält die EU-Führung so vehement an der Kriegsunterstützung der Ukraine fest? Und wie wirkt sich diese Verbissenheit auf das Gefüge innerhalb der EU aus?
The EU is destroying itself. Any principles that they had, any notion of a rules-based organization is thrown out the window. It's become nothing more than a vehicle of expediency for the biggest members of the European Union, which means it's not a European Union. It's an organization controlled by a handful of states. It's in danger of becoming irrelevant because nobody's going to tolerate this kind of behavior. You know, the EU has painted itself into a very uncomfortable corner. Borrell has made a number of inflammatory statements over the years, making projections about Ukrainian victory and the European Union's role in achieving that victory that have turned out to be baseless. Ukraine has lost, and there's nothing the European Union can do to change that outcome. But Europe hasn't gotten to the point yet where it can acknowledge defeat. And so once again, they will continue to try to save their own political reputations at the expense of Ukrainian lives, because every dollar spent by the European Union in Ukraine just furthers the suffering of the Ukrainian nation. But it will have no meaningful impact whatsoever. As I said before, Russia has strategically won this war, and there's nothing anybody can do to change this. You might be able to prolong the suffering of Ukraine, but you're not going to change the ultimate outcome.
Deutschland spielt bei der Kriegsunterstützung der Ukraine in der EU eine maßgebliche Rolle. So plant die Bundesregierung, ihre Militärhilfe für Kiew zu verdoppeln, von 4 auf 8 Milliarden Euro im kommenden Jahr. Gleichzeitig bekundete Bundeskanzler Olaf Scholz seine Bereitschaft, mit dem russischen Präsidenten Wladimir Putin zu sprechen. Aus seiner Sicht würden Verhandlungen allerdings erfordern, dass sich die russischen Truppen aus allen Gebieten zurückziehen, welche die Ukraine zu ihrem Territorium zählt. Wie bewertest du die deutsche Ukraine-Politik? Welche Glaubwürdigkeit kann Bundeskanzler Scholz als Gesprächspartner für die russische Seite haben?
Well, let's just be honest, Scholz has no credibility whatsoever with Russia, with anybody. I mean, this is the man that stood silently while Joe Biden said that he's going to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. So that tells you everything you need to know about the quality of this individual. I can guarantee you that, I can't guarantee, I'm not a Russian, so I can't make such guarantees, but I would put a lot of money on the table in Las Vegas that if Scholz tried to call Vladimir Putin with those conditions, that the phone wouldn't be answered. He'd be listening to a ringtone, because the Russians just don't care about Germany and about Scholz. They've made themselves totally irrelevant. Let's also be honest, 8 billion euro isn't that much. And you take a look at the package that Germany is proposing, old tanks, not new tanks, old equipment. Ukraine fires 6,000 to 7,000 rounds of 155 millimeter ammunition a day. And I think Germany was offering, a couple thousand rounds, not even a day's worth of artillery ammunition. This is a joke. It's a pathetic joke. And it just underscores the reality that Germany has nothing left to give. But Scholz is trying to position himself as being the most relevant man on the deck of the Titanic after it hit an iceberg. meaning the ship's sinking. There's nothing you can do to save it. And to run around and pretend that somehow you're the captain of this ship, go ahead. It's a self-solving problem. Germany is irrelevant. The European Union's irrelevant. Ukraine is defeated. Nothing's going to change this.
Die Ukraine und ihr Präsident Wladimir Selenskij hadern derzeit sichtbar mit dem schwindenden Rückhalt aus den USA. Große Hoffnung scheint Selenskij hingegen auf den ehemaligen US-Präsidenten Donald Trump zu setzen und dessen möglicherweise erfolgreichen Kandidatur bei der US-Präsidentschaftswahl im kommenden Jahr. Eine Einladung nach Kiew hatte Trump bereits abgelehnt und auf die amtierende US-Regierung als Gesprächspartner verwiesen. Dennoch lässt Kiew nichts unversucht und will nun ein Telefonat zwischen Trump und Selenskij organisieren. Warum setzen Kiew und Selenskij auf Trump? Und was kann Trump, der von sich selbst behauptet, er könnte den Ukraine-Krieg binnen 24 Stunden beenden, überhaupt bewirken?
Let's just make it clear. Donald Trump is not the president of the United States. Therefore, Donald Trump has no ability whatsoever, zero ability to influence the outcome of this war. None. If he manages to win an election in November, and that's a big if, he still isn't going to be the president of the United States until Inauguration Day in January 2025. I will bet you that Zelensky is no longer president of Ukraine at that time. I will bet you that this war is not going on at that time. I will bet you that this is no longer an issue being discussed by anybody at that time. They're not going to be talking about the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. They're going to be talking about the Russian defeat of Ukraine and the ongoing denazification of Ukraine by Russian occupying forces. This is just stupidity in the extreme. Zelensky understands that he has lost the support of the world. He is the world's least relevant leader right now. Nobody's taking his call. Nobody's paying attention to him. So he's trying to resurrect something that gives him, at least visibility of being relevant, but he's not. He has to deal with serious problems from within Ukraine. There's a growing civil military divide. General Zaluzhny is not happy with Zelensky. Zelensky's not happy with Zaluzhny. There's talk about, a purging of the ranks to possibly include Zaluzhny. There's whispers about the potential of a military coup involving Zaluzhny. I think Zelensky has a lot more things to worry about than whether or not Donald Trump will take his call.
Ich sprach vorhin über eine Koalition der Willigen für die Ukraine. Bei diesem Schlagwort denkt man unwillkürlich an George W. Bush und Tony Blair und ihre Kriege gegen Afghanistan und Irak. Der ehemalige britische Premierminister Blair wurde jüngst laut israelischen Medien von Seiten Israels ins Gespräch gebracht als möglicher humanitärer Koordinator für den Gazastreifen. Gerade Blair, der laut dem Chilcot-Bericht aus dem Jahr 2016 mit dem Afghanistan- und Irakkrieg nicht nur gegen das Völkerrecht verstoßen hat, sondern auch verantwortlich sein soll für Kriegsverbrechen. Was sagst du zu dem Vorstoß Israels? Wie soll gerade Blair als humanitärer Koordinator für die Palästinenser agieren können?
I think it's a non-starter to begin with. Tony Blair will have no credibility amongst the international audience who knows full well what he did in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the lies that he promulgated, and the fact that he participated in one of the most massive violations of international law in modern times. That is the illegal war of aggression with Iraq and then the occupation that took place afterwards. I find it ironic that Israel, who right now is being accused of committing massive atrocities against the Palestinian people, who global leaders such as Recep Erdogan in Turkey are submitting paperwork to the International Criminal Court to charge Benjamin Netanyahu as a war criminal. It's ironic that Israel would turn to a known war criminal to be a humanitarian aid coordinator, as if Israel, A, cared about humanitarian aid, and B, cared about international law.
Bleiben wir thematisch in Großbritannien. Nicht nur Tony Blair kehrte aus der historischen Versenkung zurück, sondern auch der ehemalige Premierminister David Cameron findet seinen Weg zurück auf die politische Bühne. Cameron wird zukünftig als neuer britischer Außenminister agieren. Warum gerade Cameron? Und welche außenpolitische Ausrichtung soll Großbritannien unter einem Außenminister Cameron nehmen, der sich einst für den Verbleib in der EU ausgesprochen hatte?
I think what we're looking at is a British government in total disarray. The current prime minister is firing ministers. He has people resigning. It just seems that he has no choice but to dip into a blast from the past, to pull out a face that people are comfortable with, that there's a known quantity, but the known quantity isn't one of high quality. It shows you the low bar that's being set right now by the Tory party in terms of leadership. But again, we're looking at a British government in total disarray and on the verge of collapse with no confidence. It's just part of the ongoing tragic comedy that is British politics.
In unserem Interview vergangene Woche sprachen wir über das möglicherweise bevorstehende globale atomare Wettrüsten. Unsere Zuschauer haben die Frage gestellt, inwieweit der Iran daran ebenfalls partizipieren würde. Hat der Iran schon die Befähigung zur Herstellung eigener Atombomben? Und hat er die nötigen Trägerraketen dafür, um an einer eigenen atomaren Abschreckung zu arbeiten?
Well, first of all, we just have to understand that Iran has said that it will not be pursuing a nuclear weapon, and there's no evidence whatsoever to sustain any allegation that Iran has changed this policy stance. One can say that Iran's enrichment program is sufficiently developed enough that it could produce highly enriched uranium should Iran make that decision. Iran hasn't made that decision. Iran's nuclear enrichment program is closely monitored by the International Atomic Energy Agency as part of Iran's safeguards agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency, and there's no evidence of diversion for purposes other than the peaceful civilian power and limited research activity that defines Iran's nuclear program. So I find it somewhat curious to be trying to answer a question that's already been answered, because there's no reason to speculate about an Iranian nuclear weapons program. Iran has said they are not going to be pursuing one, and there's no evidence of them. Now, if we want to talk about deterrence, Iran has achieved a certain level of sophistication in its long-range ballistic missile capabilities, especially when it comes to precision strike, attached to hypersonic maneuvering warheads that, especially when dealing with a nation the size of Israel, you don't need nuclear weapons to destroy Israel. And Iran, I believe, has crossed the threshold of possessing a viable non-nuclear ballistic missile-based deterrence, meaning that if Israel were to attack Iran, Iran could destroy Israel using conventional munitions. So we don't need to be talking about nuclear weapons. We need to just point out the reality that if Israel and Iran go to war, Israel would not come out the winner. Iran might be destroyed by Israel's nuclear weapons. That's a separate issue. But Israel would not come out the winner. Israel would be destroyed.
Und was ist mit Nordkorea? Würdest du zustimmen, dass Nordkorea sich an einem weltweiten nuklearen Wettrüsten beteiligen würde? Hat Nordkorea die Möglichkeit, zum Beispiel einen Atomschlag gegen die USA zu führen?
Well, North Korea already has engaged in a nuclear arms race. They have produced nuclear weapons, and they have produced modern ballistic missile delivery capabilities, inclusive of both liquid and solid fueled intercontinental ballistic missiles that can reach any point in the United States. The reality is that if there were a nuclear exchange involving North Korea, that South Korea, Japan would both be destroyed, and the United States would suffer tremendous losses because North Korean missiles with nuclear warheads would hit American cities. North Korea, of course, would be annihilated. There wouldn't be anything left of North Korea, but that doesn't do anybody good living in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Denver, any of these cities that are susceptible to being struck by North Korean intercontinental ballistic missiles. And it wouldn't do any good for the hundreds of millions of Japanese and South Koreans who would likewise perish in a nuclear fight. This is why it's imperative to be talking about nuclear disarmament and not any effort to match North Korea step by step. Nuclear war is unwinnable by anybody. And once you engage, everybody who touches the nuclear genie will die.
Lass uns zum Schluss noch über das US-Militär sprechen. US-Verteidigungsminister Lloyd Austin war kürzlich zu Besuch in Südkorea, wo er behauptete, die Vereinigten Staaten haben die stärkste Armee der Welt. Was sagst du zu dieser Aussage? Haben die USA die stärkste Armee der Welt?
I mean, that's what he gets paid to say, so that's what he's going to say, but it's not the strongest army in the world. I would challenge Lloyd Austin to tell me how he thinks the United States Army is going to win a ground war in Korea. I mean, he can't even begin to have that conversation because on day one, North Korean conventional artillery will decimate the American military presence in South Korea. North Korea possesses a strategic advantage in conventional artillery, including deep strike, precision-guided rockets that will devastate the totality of the American military infrastructure. Anything that survives would be swamped by a superior North Korean conventional army that will defeat not only the Americans, but the South Koreans. Now, the United States has a plan to reinforce South Korea, but it will take months for the United States to mobilize the troops, get them ready, and have them shipped across the Pacific to fight in South Korea. And there's no guarantee of victory once they arrive. But let's say he got involved in that fight, because that's where he opened his mouth, on the Korean Peninsula. Let's just assume that Lloyd Austin says, we have the most powerful military, we could do this in Korea. So while Lloyd Austin is mobilizing the totality of American military power to deal with North Korea, what do you do about Russia, Lloyd? What do you do? Let's just say, what the hell? Your worst nightmare comes true. And Russia says, while America is engaged strategically in North Korea and they got nothing left, we're just going to take Poland out and the Baltic states out. How are you going to respond, Lloyd, with the world's most powerful army? Because let me give you a pro hint. You have nobody in the American military that possesses 1/10 of the combat experience that the Russian army, the totality of the Russian army possesses because of the ongoing Ukrainian conflict. The Russian army today is the best trained, best equipped, most experienced military force in the world. And there's more of them than you have, Lloyd Austin. How are you going to square that one? You can't. But let's say you got North Korea going and you got the Russians going into Poland and the Baltics. What do you do with your most powerful army in the world, boss, when Iran still tells you to stick it up your ear, when they start overrunning your bases in Syria and Iraq? Where are you going to get the troops to respond to that, Lloyd? You don't got it anymore, do you? Because the U.S. Army can't win one war, let alone 2 wars, let alone 3 wars. And God forbid China makes a move on Taiwan while all this is happening. You got nothing, Lloyd. You got nothing. You take $800 billion of U.S. taxpayer money a year and you squander it, and we got nothing. That's the reality, Lloyd. You got the weakest military in the world because it can't do the things you claim you want it to do.
Vielen Dank, Scott, wie immer, für deine Zeit und deine aufschlussreichen Analysen. Wir freuen uns schon auf nächste Woche.
Thanks.
Dankeschön. Meine lieben Zuschauer, auch an euch, wie immer, herzlichen Dank fürs Zusehen. Wenn euch die Sendung gefallen hat, dann teilt das Video doch bitte breit in den sozialen Medien, abonniert eben noch unseren Kanal Gegenpol, folgt uns unbedingt auch auf den Plattformen Odyssey und X, ehemals Twitter, und vor allem, wenn ihr mal Fragen habt, die wir unbedingt an Scott Ritter stellen sollen, dann schreibt sie uns doch in die Kommentare. Bis dahin, eure Monique.